All right. Hello. Welcome to the Tyrants 10. It's my second podcast. Uh, welcome everyone. I got Fabian Liberty. His actual name's Scott. Uh, so introduce yourself, please. Let the people know what beautiful things you've done.
Yeah, well, short and sweet as an intro is not something I'm famous for. So if you ever check out my YouTube channel at Fabian Liberty on YouTube or on X or other platforms, you're probably not going to get short and sweet intros like that one just was. I appreciate the brevity. Brevity is the soul of wit, they say, and I must lack all of the wit, but I don't lack the intelligence or the philosophy to preach libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, and to debate with other people and trap them in corners. So, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and that's who I am. I'm just a guy on the internet. I was a kid who grew up poor that became, that then was homeless, then traveled the East Coast with Armenian gypsies to do construction work until they called themselves that. Don't laugh. And then, went into the Army as a medic, went into psych soc, had a family. COVID destroyed everything while I was in grad school. And then I just became a loser dude on the internet, obsessed with libertarian philosophy, natural law, and that's been my goal, is to spread that message and learn and interview and do those wonderful things. And I'm happy to be here.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy that you're here too. So, I've been watching your stuff for a couple months now, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you seem to be like, and you describe yourself this as like, I don't know, like the least autistic libertarian, and I appreciate that, right? As someone who,
Yeah, yeah.
so, you know, I like Liquid Zulu, right? But he gets down there. He gets in the tism sometimes, right? But watching you,
Yeah.
you actually like you get to like the actual core of what's happening, right? And not really get distracted by, I don't know, the other things that's happening in like certain conversations.
Mm.
So yeah, I really appreciate that. Um, and
Yeah, well,
so
I
like,
think I think if you want to, if, and I'm assuming that people that come to your channel, and I've spoken a little bit with you, they're probably here for libertarian esque things, right?
mm,
And you know, the thing that's important to know is you don't need a big tent strategy to for libertarianism, right? You do need to gatekeep philosophically, but you shouldn't gatekeep in terms of the type of content and the way that you communicate and reach to audiences, right? I think often there's a lot of libertarians that like get mad at like the Dave Smith types that are mostly just speaking to like right-wing populists and aren't really like clear on the philosophy, and they equate that with like, oh, I have to be ultra perfect with the language. Like I was on Tim Pool recently and I'm going through all the comments, and like there's like 20 people in the comments, random libertarians that showed up, and they were pissed off at me because I said taxation is theft. And they had to correct me in the comments that taxation is actually extortion. It's not theft. And then explain why extortion and theft are different. And it's like, dude, I'm on fucking Timcast. Like, celebrate with me, number one. And number two, recognize that, like, there's different ways to communicate ideas and there's different levels, and audiences, are going to react to different things. Like, that's why I'm excited to watch people like you hop in, because, like, I try to understand Gen Z, and like I don't really get it. You know what I mean? They're a core of my audience, right? But like we also need like young people that understand that culture and that way to communicate to a different generation. It shouldn't be a big tent in terms of ideas, because you should be purely libertarian, but it should be a big tent in the way that we communicate and the way and the different types of people we're able to reach.
yeah, yeah, it just it sometimes gets like in the movement, right? Like looking at
Mm-hmm.
things, right? And you certainly don't want the big tent, right? Because when a lot of people think of libertarianism, they don't think of Murray Rothbard or
No.
uh, or even Milton Friedman, right? They just think of these libertine people, live or let live,
Mm-hmm.
freaking, you
God's guns,
know,
ganja.
yeah, pretty much that. And then, as well in Australia, I had for my first interview, I had the founder of the Australian Libertarian Party, um, John Humphreys, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, when he was when he started the party, right, he called it the Liberal Democrats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like an anarcho-capitalist, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why he did that, right, is because like libertarianism didn't have like a namesake in 2001, right?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Mm-hmm.
no one in Australia knew what libertarianism is, right? They knew what liberalism is, right? Because our major right-wing party is the Liberal Party, right? So they kind of get an
Right.
idea of that. And then and then at the time, the centrist party, right, was was like the Democrat Party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to an American, right, the Liberal Democrat sounds like the most left-wing party out there, right? But
Right.
here,
Right.
it makes sense. So, it's just trying to get to the core of ideas and not getting too hung up on these certain like things, right? Because the liberal Democrats, like, oh, what libertarian is a Democrat?
Well,
Like
so I think
it's just
the thing is that like when I hear the liberal Democrats, I think of that quote, and I want to say it's from Lysander Spooner, but it could be from Benjamin Tucker. So I apologize if I get it incorrect. But it's just we are simply um, unafraid Jeffersonian Democrats. Right now, obviously, these are anarcho individualists, and so America is the home of libertarianism, and it's not just the history of the American Revolution and like our obsession with limited government compared to many of the other liberal democracies. But it's also because the anarcho individualists were here, right? Like Lysander Spooner, Benjamin Tucker, Josiah Warren, even Voltaire de Cleyre, right? And so even before libertarianism was made or kind of like repurposed as a term by Murray Rothbard, that vein of private property anarchy was kind of a uniquely American idea. And so there is, the flip side of that is that our politicians, especially Reagan, right, and like that Reagan Bush years, started calling the left liberals, right, which is like makes no sense, but it was just a political tool because the term progressive started being seen as a positive. So when people called them progressives, they were like, hell yeah, we're progressive. And then everyone was like, that sounds good. I like that. So they started calling them liberals, as an insult. And the rest of the world kind of didn't catch on to this stupid idea. The rest of the world was like, no, liberals are like limited government, egalitarians that believe everybody has equal rights and that a government, that governs, a government that governs best is a government that governs least. And so, yeah, I do think the name is somewhat problematic. I even sometimes struggle with it myself because there's a unpublished writing by Rothbard where, he almost didn't want to call us ANCAPs, right? Because he was worried that we would be too much associated with like Kropotkin and, the anarcho-communists and, the anarcho-syndicalists and like these leftists that are just communists that like, hide under the veil of anarchism. And so he wrote in a thing like, maybe we should call ourselves non-anarchists, right? Like just to differentiate ourselves from anarchists. And it was just like he was just penciling ideas. It wasn't a good idea, but I do think the voluntarists kind of might have been on the right vein there. They were like, no. We're not going to take the name anarchists because I don't feel like having that conversation every time and being like, no, we're the real anarchists. personally, I like to fight for the term, and I like to fight for the term libertarian, but it is going to take a long time before, and I think we're kind of there. Like, it's been a hard fought fight, but I think most of the Western world now kind of knows when someone says I'm a libertarian, they're beginning to understand that that is at the least a very limited government, low taxes position.
Yeah, and you said that the kind of the world just like kind of just stayed in the way and just kept the liberal to like their kind of definition. But I wish that our Liberal Party has stuck to their actual core values, right? Because you look at like the we believe statement, and it's basically like a classical liberal like view of the world. Like, this is like a libertarian position, right? But they've just turned into these big government speech controlling like authoritarians along with Labor, right? And that's like our uniparty, right? Labor and liberals. And
As an
so
American, just hearing that sounds so bad.
Yes,
because liberal is still like a pejorative in my mind, even though I am probably more liberal than most of the people I talk to. Yeah, I mean, the real issue is you cannot build a cohesive political philosophy around values. It's not possible, right? That's the real problem. That is the problem with every right-wing party in the Western world, is because values alone, can only inform. They can inform policy, sure. They can inform the way that you tweak it, but they don't. Like, you need our founding fathers, when here in America, when they set up, liberal democracies, they understood the threat of government, right? It was James Monroe, made a claim that, like, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said our entire government's over once Congress realizes how powerful the power to tax is. Like, he knew, they knew from the inception that this was a temporary thing that wouldn't work, but they had to get rid of monarchy and they had to establish some level of order, or at least they believed so, because Murray Rothbard didn't invent libertarianism yet. But and we hadn't had marginal revolution, and we hadn't had a lot of the Austrians, so I mean, like, obviously, like, but I greatly respect, there is the conservatives, they view the founding fathers as these geniuses, and yet none of them even understand the philosophy that informed these people. They were coming out of the Enlightenment, and they were against landed gentry. They were against, elites having power and control over politics. And they did, at the time, came up with the best system that they thought they could come up with, right? To try and limit that. They knew that was an ever increasing threat. And, it was Thomas Jefferson that has that famous quote. He's the author of the Declaration of Independence. He's also the author of, he's obviously a framer, founding father, signer of the Constitution, the author of the Virginia, which is one of the state Constitution. And he said, the tree of liberty has to be watered with the blood of tyrants tyrants and civilians? Patriots. Sorry. The tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots alike, right? Like, you cannot maintain liberty without bloodshed and without constantly fighting for it. And there's something very sickening about our modern consumerism, and that has kind of put us in this place where we are now, where we're very much, it reminds me of Nietzsche's call about God is dead, right? Is like, there is this corpse of these ideas, and we're just kind of feeding off of the corpse of something our founding fathers and ancestors put forward, and we don't realize that that's what we're doing, right? Like, we're pissing on the shoulders of giants. And that's where things like fascism and communism come from, is because when the values no longer work in a framework that constantly shifts ever more socialist and keeping, the corporate and the elites in power, you get a reaction, right? Because the values no longer align with the political philosophy. And that's where we are now, where we're in a real dangerous place where I think, if we're not careful, if we can't come to solutions, either communism or fascism is kind of the destiny of most liberal democracies right now.
Yeah, like I've kind of caught on to, the whole, the tree of liberty has been watered by like tyrants and patriots like thing like a couple of years ago, right? Because watching like what's happening to Australia, right? We had no revolution, right? We
Mm-hmm.
like like the closest thing that we had to a revolution was like a gold miners strike in Victoria, where they shot a couple of redcoats because they didn't want to be taxed. But like other than that, we have nothing, right? We don't really have this history of like freedom fighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of like most of our wars, right, that we fought, right? We fought right for cannon fodder for the British, right? Um, and
Or for the
like
Americans later.
oh yeah, or for the Americans later, yes, that's true. But no,
It's a
like
coalition.
yeah, we just like I mean ping ponged back and forward. Who can we die for more? But like like we're going to these like like wars that are not like don't even affect us. Like what was like the rationale for Australia, right, to go fight in Europe for World War I? Like other than that we were a crown colony, right? Like
Right.
and so we went to go support like the mother country, but like it had no importance to us. And yes, we gained some like old German territories in the Pacific, but like what was that worth like 17,000 Australians dying in one day for like British cannon fodder, right? Like it's just like we are so disconnected from the rest of the world, right? And when we fight for our freedom, as the propagandists tell us, like the freedom has nothing to do with us. We're fighting for other people's freedoms, right?
Mm.
It's just so like I'm just frankly, and I'm mortified by this conclusion, right? Because like I don't want bad things to happen, but it seems like if we need major political change, bad things need to happen. Like
Well,
we need to
so
kick up the
yeah.
ass.
Well, so the thing that gets me is where do values come from, right? And values come from two places. They come from a cultural identity and they come from philosophy, right? And so the West has no shared philosophy. The philosophy that, was given to us in the Enlightenment, you know, split off into two places. And it split off into this, Kantian, into, Hegelian into Marxist kind of socialist branch, right? And then it's split off into, a kind of libertarian philosophy. Those are the only two natural extensions of that philosophy. I obviously, as a libertarian, I think the the socialist aspect is the poisoning of the well, if you will, right? I think that we're obviously they would disagree, but I would you know what I mean. I have my arguments, but they're not here today, and I'm not gonna beat beat a straw man with no one here to represent themselves. But right, but so there's that. But the other important aspect that I think you're touching on is that values come from a cultural identity and cultural norms, right? And when you lose, and so like, what is a cultural identity? Really, it's a story that people tell about themselves and about the history and about where they plan to go. If you ask a Canadian or an American, maybe not so much an American, there are some Americans, but if you ask a British person or your standard, Western European, your Australian, your Canadian, what are you fighting for? They have no answer. So they have no future. They have no shared cultural identity of what the future is. And then if you ask them, well, what is an Australian? Most of them will say someone born in Australia. Right? There's no sense of who they are other than being born on a plot of land belonging to a government as a slave. And then if you ask them who they were, you will get a myriad of leftist subverted historical narratives designed to attack the identity of an Australian. Because, like, let me tell you what I think of when I think of the Australian culture that's almost gone. I think of exploration. I think of the people that wanted to go out into places that nobody else wanted to go and stake land in those places. It's not like the American that's fighting for freedom. It's not like the American that's, warmongering in the ideas of liberty. That's not the Australian identity. The Australian identity that I think of is, even though it's somewhat cliche, but it's, the spirit of the outback, the spirit of going to a place, setting themselves up as the rejects of Europe and building their own place out of that and going into dangerous territory. And that is what an Australian should feel about themselves, right? Like, an Australian should think, me and my ancestors went into the most infertile land, most inhospitable place, and we staked a claim because that's who we are. We explore, we go to the edges of the map, right? Like, as Jordan Peterson, you say all the time, at the edges of the map it says, here they be dragons, right? That's what I think of as an Australian, is they're the people, they're the culture that went to the edge of the map and said, here be dragons and let's see what's here. And, like, that's gone. And so when you lose that, and you lose what you are, and you lose what your future is, then values are just these kind of made up things that were passed on from your parents that you don't really believe in and you don't really fight for anymore. And so I think until Western civilization can reclaim their own story and identity, they will be forever kind of bouncing around in the sea with no sail. And that's my greatest fear for fascism, because fascism brings that back. It twists it, it poisons it, but break no bones about it. When someone comes back and says, I invoke blood and soil, it speaks to people in a language that no one else is speaking, that has been only whispered. And I think if we want to move towards a free society, and preach libertarianism, we have to win that fight. And I don't know that we can, at least not right now.
That in Australia, there's like there's like a actual Nazi movement here, like that has some size and movements. Like, I see, like there was, like, not that long ago, there was like a Nazi march in my city, right? Of Adelaide, right? I see stickers all over the place, saying, like National Socialist Network, right? Which is like the big Nazi thing here, right? So yeah, that's what, like, a lot of people are turning to, right? Because they see, right, this kind of like they ultimately see a myth, right? That they enjoy, right? They see this, like, we Aryans were once so proud and great, right? But then these outsiders came in and started to change things, right? And then and now we've become pussies, right? And now we need to take our manhood back, right? And
But all of those, see, that's the problem, is that all of those things that you just said are true. And no one else is saying it. It's like, it's almost like an Andrew Tate effect, right? It's like Andrew Tate is a serial sex trafficker. Sue me, bitch. I don't care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he openly admits it. Like, the only evidence you need is his own fucking words, right? He likes fucking little girls and beating them. He's a monster. He's a horrible person. But when he speaks on certain issues of masculinity, it's like, what does sound like in a vacuum?
Mm-hmm.
Like you know what I mean? Like he comes in with the first whispered words in a vacuum, and they're the sweetest words so many young men could ever hear, because nobody else is speaking that, because
Mm-hmm.
everyone else has lost that ability to communicate just certain basic realities, right? And it's
Mm.
like, yes, we have become pussies. Yes, we aren't fighting for us. Yes, we used to have a culture that was admittedly centered around white identity or our European ancestry and identity, that was stronger, more cohesive, and able and more forward thinking and proud than our current system that is subverted white noise, right? Like no, and so it's like if they're the only ones speaking that language, then yeah, they're going to get listeners.
Yeah. Um, yeah, like, so, and I think one of the reasons why um it caught on, like, seems like Nazism has is catching on in Australia, right? Because Australia was essentially a white ethno state until the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we the one of the first policies put in place was the White Australia policy, right? To stop Asian immigration, right? And and when people go back in time, right, and they see things kind of start to go downhill around the 70s, right? Um, I prescribed that to just Gough Whitlam in general because he was a socialist bastard, right? But like but they, but then as well, there is some kind of truth of it, right? Because they're because there's big pushing of multiculturalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, I think it ignores, right, like just basic realities, right? Like, I like how, like, can it be, right? Is that like like ultimately, right, there's gonna be a losing culture, right, in this multiculturalist space, right? And
Mm-hmm.
right, because ultimately I think everything can be put in a hierarchy, right? And
Mm.
sadly, something has to be at the bottom of it, right? But I don't know, like, what do you think?
Well, I think the concept of multiculturalism is a bad name, or it's a good name for what it is, which is subversive, right?
Mm,
Because it's not really multiculturalism. What it is a lack of culture. That's what multiculturalism is an attempt to destroy the concept of a shared culture, right? And so it's like, yeah, of course, as an American, I don't mind having taco trucks, right? Like I don't mind
mm,
having, you know, music. I don't mind having things, that are that other idea, that other cultures bring in that are potentially, ways to improve the culture that we live in. But you cannot have, like, is racist as it is, the Japanese have an understanding, right,
mm,
in their legal framework that feels very evil, but is just very true, right? Which is that if I go over to Japan and I marry a Japanese woman and I have children, my children will be a hafu, right? They will not be fully, that's their term, right? They will not be fully Japanese. They will not be treated as Japanese. It's not until those children marry another Japanese person and have children that those children will become fully seen as Japanese. Well, is it because they're half white? Well, that's an easy way of looking at it, right? But it's not really because they're half white. It's because I'm an American and I have American ideas and I have an American spirit and I have, American cultural traditions. And so when I go there, no matter how long I live there, I'll never be Japanese. I couldn't. How could I be Japanese? You know what I
mm,
mean? Like it would be impossible for me to be such. Um, but then you would go, well, why wouldn't your children be Japanese if they grew up in Japan? Well, it's because one of their parents, one of the people that is responsible for teaching them everything, is American and is passing on all of those values. And so the American doesn't even see the Japanese world as a Japanese person. but it is the child of the Japanese and the American that sees both sides and has both of them in them, right? And because of that, that person is able to meld both of the cultures and figure out this works in Japanese society and this doesn't work in Japanese society. And then when they teach their children, the only thing they teach their children are the things, the values, the cultural beliefs, the cultural practices that work well with Japanese culture. And it's that third generation that actually improves the Japanese culture, because the outside perspective has now gone from the crazy cowboy to the child that, you know, it lives in with their foot in two different worlds, to the grandchild that has only been taught the things from that other culture that improve the culture, that add to the culture, or at the very least don't clash with the culture. And that's how a culture is able to assimilate. That's how a culture is able to change as times change. And so I don't necessarily agree with the legal framework of not granting full citizenship or, you know, gatekeeping someone that grew up their whole life in a country from ever feeling like they're a part of that country. But I do agree with the concept that you cannot have a culture that constantly brings in immigration and constantly brings in new ideas and constantly tries to change and reinvent itself and constantly shames itself for its own history and expect to have like a cohesive culture that works, right? The entire concept of multiculturalism is not a battle between two cultures. It's a battle between the vestiges of the culture that once was and people in power that have a vested interest in eroding any sense of cultural norms beyond consumerism and beyond the corporate and governmental power structures that exist.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what Stalin tried to do by like moving all of
Mm-hmm.
these different populations about to, you know, to try and destroy their cultural identity, you know,
Absolutely.
you know,
And most famously with the Jews, he was
yeah,
he really tried to move Jews around. He was like, the moment he heard that a Yiddish church was getting too big, he was like, nope, half of you are going to Siberia.
hmm yeah, and if he didn't die in 53, I believe, he probably would have staged another Holocaust. Like,
Yeah, I mean, the
eh,
doctor's plot was starting to get pretty fucking wild, right? Like, I mean,
mm,
like, obviously there's the Holodomor, but the Holodomor is it's a different type of genocide, right?
mm,
Like a lot of people on the right that bring up the Holodomor don't actually understand communism, so they don't really get it, right? It's like Stalin wasn't trying to kill every kulak because he hated farmers and kulaks, right? He was trying to implement communism. He was trying to implement socialism, and then in people's individual sense of property clashed with that. And like a bull in a china shop, he just said, we'll kill you, right? It wasn't like it wasn't a like a deep-seated hatred for an ethnic group. It's like it doesn't fit the classic understanding of what a genocide is. But yeah, with the doctor's plot, he was getting really fucking psycho there in the 50s. I absolutely agree with you. He probably would have started genociding people, and it probably would have been Jews.
yeah,
But it usually is, to be fair.
yeah, you know, they're the classic scapegoat. So kind of keeping on the same topic, have you seen any of the Dave Smith, Douglas Murray, Joe Rogan
No.
documentaries coming out?
I'm gonna react to it on stream later. I haven't
Oh,
gotten to
okay.
it.
Yeah.
And whenever this video gets released, I probably have already watched it
Yeah.
on my
Right.
channel. You know what I mean? But yeah.
Okay. Okay. So stay tuned. All right. All right. So you haven't seen anything about it? No clips?
No, I try and shy away from clips a lot of times.
All right.
I'm usually if I catch one and I'm like, ooh, that's awesome, then I'll be like, okay, let me save this for stream because I try to do like genuine reactions on stream. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. That's okay. We can. So like so.
You can
When
talk about it. It's fine.
yeah, no. I'm no, I'm just gonna just talk about Israel now, rather than that.
All right, yeah. Great way to launch a YouTube career, by the way. Is just like, how can we shit on Israel? Is the best way to launch a
Yes.
a YouTube channel without getting censored. Perfect. Chef's kiss.
Yes. But so for a very long time, I was very pro-Israel. I was a Ben Shapiro fan. I was in that kind of stream, right? And then as I started to get introduced to like libertarianism, right? And like this is throughout last year, right? So during October 7th, right? Like probably up until like, I don't know, probably April last year, right? I was probably a staunch, right, Israel person, right? I had all of like the talking points that you've probably heard of, right? But then as I started to get more introduced to libertarianism, right? It seems like it swung in the complete opposite direction, right? It's like, and like to be like, oh, the Palestinians, they're just, you know, like, or they're just, I don't know, completely innocent, like in a sense, and then Israel has only done bad things and all of that stuff. But and then that's where I kind of appreciate your perspective because it's more balanced, right? And
yeah, it's it's I don't have a centrist opinion. I hope I have a libertarian opinion.
Yes.
Right. And if you look at it as a libertarian, and a lot of libertarians have looked at this as, I hear so many like PLO talking points from libertarians, Scott Horton, Dave Smith, a lot of them, they, like, and you can hear these little catchphrases, and there's like, and like you hear when they talk about it, they don't talk like, there are no good people in this story. Like, I'm sorry. And it's like, I've been blocked by Yaron Brook and Clint Russell and, and people that I've interviewed both of them, and I've been on Clint Russell's program because I'm not pro-Palestine enough. Right. But that doesn't mean I fucking like Israel. Right. Like any nation state, it has its problems. But I mean, like, it's hard to stand behind a country that decided that Supreme Court of Israel decided using human shields is probably illegal in 2011. You know what I mean? Like, it's like Israel's a fucked up country, and what they're doing in Gaza is fucked up. But it is also, you also like but there's also just so much nonsense in this conversation. And one of the things that upsets me the most is that I don't see a single libertarian that is libertarian on the conflict. What I see is a bunch of people that hate nation states, that, run kind of like cover for the Palestinians, you should run cover for them, Jesus Christ, but for Hamas, right? And the PLO. And it's like, I hear from them constantly, like, oh, well, this is why we need a two-state solution. Fucking first and foremost, the first thing out of your mouth should be free these people, not create a new nation state.
Yeah.
Second of all, there's very little discussion of property rights in this entire conversation, right? Like, I am saying, yeah, we need to bring in like the ICJ or something. Maybe not the ICJ because they suck, but some form of court system to adjudicate who owns what property. Okay, and give people notice that say, hey, were you kicked out during the Nakba? Okay, do you have court documents that are deeds to a house or a property? Okay, well, that's your fucking land. And then let the who's ever living there now be like, hey, I have, I got a defense attorney, and like their family were terrorists. Okay, well, terrorists don't have the right to keep the land, right? Like, they get kicked off of the land. But not every fucking person, in the West Bank that's been pushed away, or every person kicked out by the Nakba was a fucking terrorist. But the problem, again, stems from philosophy. The Jews are in a position where they know that if they were to do a one-state solution, or if they were allowed to do land back, that they would suffer the same fate that Lebanon did. That's just a reality, right? The
Yeah.
reality is if you gave a Muslim majority voting rights in Israel, they would vote from the river to the sea. Like they
Yeah.
just would. They would vote for genocide. That's what they would vote for because that's what the people in the region have voted for every time. Now, it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario, though, because it's like, well, there are Jews in other Muslim countries that seem to be doing okay. You know what I mean? Like, like it's like, you know what I mean? Like there are places where it's not so great to be a Jew, a lot of places, right? But then there are places where it's not so bad. And it's like, well, is that because you've been bombing them for fucking, for damn near 100 years? So it's like, it's a really, really swampy kind of there are no good guys story here. And I think that
Literally
nobody
swamp.
likes that, right? Like nobody likes that. Everybody wants, to have a side to root for and like and a chant to say that they can wrap up in a pretty bow. And unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that basically everybody over there is fucked up. Like the Palestinians are, they voted for Hamas. That's horrible. But at the same time, many of the people that are like 19, 20 years old weren't born when that vote occurred. And then at the same time, we can go on YouTube and we can find videos of school-aged children that say that they can't wait till the day that they can be a part of the Intifada and kill the Jews. So it's like, like the PLO's original charter, obviously it's not Hamas and Gaza, but like, the original like 80s charter says that, the rocks will one day cry out that there is a Jew hiding behind me so that, and please, like Muslim, come and kill this Jew. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
I think that's out the Quran.
No, it's from the fucking, it might be taken from a hadith, but it is, but it is like in their charter, like the 1986 charter for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, right? Like these are the tame good guys, right? The guys that went over to Jordan and attempted to assassinate the monarchy and then went into Lebanon and kicked off a civil war with Black September, which it was kind of already a powder keg. But you know what I mean? Like the entire history and the entire narrative is very swampy. And it seems like nobody is willing to do the difficult job of saying, no, all of these people are fucked up. And we can either go in with a libertarian framework and try and fix this, or we can take our tax dollars and tell them to figure it out themselves and just let the death and destruction occur.
Yeah. And and as you said, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation, right? Because
right.
when people are describing the conflict, right, like the most basic level, right, is people tend to just go back to like October.
It's usually the Nakba.
Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then right, you go back to the Nakba, right, and then they go back to, you know what? Let's go back to the 7th century, you know.
Right.
And it's just that there's all of these different starting points that people come from. It is a swamp that just, will it be ever fixed in our lifetimes?
Yeah, well, it's like the Nakba is one that really gets me, right? As I see so many libertarians where they like have this thing where history starts with the foundation of Israel under Britain. Well, why? Why are we not talking about the fact that there was a Palestinian British mandate, there was a Jordanian British mandate, and there was an Israeli British mandate? So the people that went, the socialists for the most part, right, that went to Israel went with a promise from the people that owned the land ostensibly, right, that they would be able to build a nation. Right, the original Israelis that got there didn't go there and just be like, "Oh, looks like free land to steal," and it's like they went to a swampland that nobody was living in, and then they brought modern farming techniques to the land and started setting up, towns, and the Muslim and Palestinian population grew in areas where Jews moved. Okay, so when they first got there, any area, they would go to uninhabited areas, and then Palestinians would move there because there were jobs there finally, because there was modern irrigation, because, swampy, fucked up land that couldn't be farmed was turned into arable land and was turned into a place where they could better feed themselves, right? And they had been under, and there are some there, and then, we start to realize there's some shisty things with deals made by purchasing land from Ottomans and using like other like people so that they didn't know that they were selling to Jews, right? And then you start having terrorist attacks, right? Likud and other mercenary organizations, they don't start popping up until like the 13th terrorist attack by Palestinians, right, against Jews. Like it's over and over and over again. Palestinians start killing Jews because they're mad about some random shit. And then what's the response? Fascistic, mercenary organizations just start doing the same shit that they're doing. And so it's like the idea that we start with the Nakba is in and of itself a propagandistic view of history. Right. Mm-hmm. We start with a clearly identifiable Israel is evil position. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why do we start like, don't get me wrong. The Nakba's fucked up. It's wrong. But it's like, why does history start there? Well, history starts there because that's the narrative. And you see the same thing with the 6-Day War, right? With like, oh, it was a war of aggression by Israel, against Egypt. And it's like, Egypt took over the Suez Canal. Israel didn't start a war then. They went to the UN. The UN brought in peacekeepers. The UN attempted to negotiate. Israel was refusing to back off. I'm sorry. Egypt was refusing to back off. So then the UN leaves. Israel still doesn't invade until Jordan and Egypt start prepping for war on the borders of Israel. And then they go, this is the Israel's war. This Israel aggression. And it's like, it's the most non-aggressive start to a war you possibly could have. Like, what? But then Israel, in the 60s is like right by conquest. And we're like, yo, right by conquest stopped in the Middle Ages. What? And they were like, this is our land now. And it's like, you can't bring back the Middle Ages, dog. Like, we have countries and nations. Like, we kind of agreed to this
Treaty
weird
of Westphalia.
Well, this Westphalian kind of concept is a bastardization of libertarianism. It's treating national borders as if they're private property borders, as if these borders can't change hands. But all of these borders were gained through taxation and conquest and death and bloodshed. None of these borders are legitimate, right? So it's a weird game. So it's not like I'm like really against Israel gaining land in that regard. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like every time we talk about something, there's like another side to it. And the worst thing is the fog of war, right? Like the amount of propagandistic lies that both sides tell make it nigh impossible to understand what's happening on the ground, right? Like, some building will get bombed and then Israel will be like, there was Hamas terrorists in a tunnel with weapons under there. And then it's like, okay. And then they're like, and we sent out pamphlets 2 days ahead and we used the roof knockers and then we bombed the place. And I'm like, okay, Israel's probably the good guys here. And then Hamas will come out and like be like, here's a bunch of fucking photos of dead children and here's a bunch of like the people that have been murdered. And then like the emotional side of me is like, ooh, Israel, that's fucked up. And then Israel will be like, well, those fucking children, check this footage out, they're fake. And then I'm like, what do you mean they're fake? And then I'm like, this same child died 2 months ago here. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So Hamas is just lying. And like, okay, Israel are the good guys. And then Hamas will be like, yeah, I just decided to grab my GoPro and show you the neighborhood. Notice how there aren't any other buildings in the neighborhood either. So how the fuck did they do a targeted strike when the entire neighborhood is gone? And I'm like, oh, Israel's evil again. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
like this like ping pong of who's most evil in this, right? And it's like the answer is war is hell, and both of these parties have a lot of sins and a lot of blood on their hands, and the conflict runs deep. And until we start telling the truth about things, and until we start bringing in libertarian philosophy, it'll continue. And so,
Yeah.
like, I'm kind of in this position where I'm like, I don't care at this point. Like, just stop giving it money. Just
Yeah.
stop giving them money. Let them run out, because there's no reason for me to fund this shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Israel can thank us, for Australians, for wheels for their F-35. So you're welcome, Israel.
Well, you know, fuck, and us. Let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's mostly you, but that's our contribution. Um, um, so
And that's about
okay,
all I got to say about that.
yeah, yeah. All right. Um, have you seen the newest Hopper Mises Institute lecture?
No, I need to watch it. It's in my
Ah,
it's in my Discord. I have
yeah.
secret channels in my Discord.
Mm,
And one of them is podcast ideas. So it's like
yeah.
it's there along with
Mm,
Tick History's video on the Treaty of Versailles. It's like one of
ah,
those things I want to look at some point on stream when I have like a free day or something.
okay. But no, it was. I don't know, Hopper's like lecture. I don't know. It had, I thought it was pretty good, but it was pretty funny at times, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about the Frankfurt School, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and how like it had benefactors and all of that stuff. And then he goes, yeah, so they had and then he just says randomly, so you have these random Argentinian Jewish benefactors, right? And then he always relates it like somehow to the Jews, and I find it funny that like behind him, Mises Institute,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
there's a big banner of Jews behind him. I reacted when he like excised Walter Block, right?
Mm,
He had this whole like article he wrote about how Walter Block's not a libertarian,
mm,
right? And it was most of his critiques were very fair. Like Walter Block was coming out 100% pro-Israel, like all forms of aggression are good against them, and nothing's
mm,
aggression because of October 7th, right? Which is just
mm,
insane, right? That there are no innocent Palestinians. Like in I don't like the term open air prison, because like obviously there is travel that is allowed, and also it's collaborative effort because Egypt won't take them.
mhm,
Um, but I mean, but part of the reason they won't take them is because they're worried that they won't be able to come back to what they deem to be their land. It's a complicated thing, right? But for all intents and purposes, it's not the worst term when people are
mhm,
essentially blockaded and can't cross one border and can't leave the place that is that is bombing them and things of that nature. Like it's like I find it weird that Americans are willing to take fucking 10, 20, 30 million South American refugees, but like we can't take Palestinian refugees. Like why? You know what I mean? Like
mm,
why can't we just pull up a boat and be like, who wants to leave the bombs? You know what I mean? Like I mean, I'm not saying we ought import a bunch of fucking, Hamas supporting fucking Muslims. I don't like, I think fuck Islam. It's a shit religion.
we live
It's
in
the
a great,
worst of the big three.
yeah. In Australia, I think we've got like 1,000 Palestinian refugees so far, something like that.
Right, but
So
it's just like it pales in comparison to like the large immigration numbers. And it's like I get that these people are particularly like problematic because of ideology and stuff, but I just find it funny more than anything. Um,
mm,
but like this weird bent that is occurring. I see it a little bit in Hoppa, but I see it in a lot of like the libertarians that are not well grounded in their philosophy, right? Which is weird that you see it kind of come from Hoppe, right? It almost makes me like question certain things. Like I'm like really trying to get to the root of like what it is, and I don't understand it in Hoppe very well. But I do understand it in a lot of libertarians that were like pro-Trump. You know what I mean? Like the ones that aren't super well grounded in their theory or in their economics, that are being swept up by this, for lack of a better term, reactionary, kind of like right-wing cultural shift that is kind of fascistic, right? That is like, okay, the entire game is rigged, so we'll play the rigged game in our own favor, right? Like that's because that's really what it is you have a lot of white people, especially, that have been subjected to, what started in many ways in the Frankfurt School with critical theory, right? To constant attack on their culture, constant attack on their identity, the institutions, the state, the media, the Hollywood, all of these places have been completely infiltrated with, people that want to play a racist game against white people. And the most obvious response to that is, okay, I'll play your game and I'll win. And people want, just like with the Israel-Palestine situation, humans want a narrative that explains things, right? They don't want to have to think about everything on a case-by-case basis, because humans can't, right? We need heuristics to be able to survive, right? Like, if you're a caveman and your buddy gets bit by a venomous spider and dies, right? You don't go, well, hold on, this next spider might be a different type of spider. Let's be fair to the spider. No, you see a spider and you kill it because your buddy got killed by a spider. You treat all spiders as potential threats until you have additional information that proves that this spider is actually chill, right? Well, we do that with ourselves. We do that with identities. We do that with religions. We do that with, political camps. We do that with people, right? And so when we see subversion of our culture, and we see, a constant shift to undermine all of our values and attack us with race games, a lot of people are like, where's the spider? What is the spider that's doing this? And what they land on is a ethnic group that has always sat in a kind of like a liminal space in culture, because they maintain their own culture, because they are a little bit higher IQ than the population, because they are more feminine, more matriarchal than traditional European cultures, right? Go to any family and you will find go to any family, any family, and what you will find is that blacks and Jews tend to be
okay.
Right. If you look at any family structure, right, in Western society, what you'll find is that blacks and Jews, very often the mother is in charge of the family, not the father. Now, for the blacks, that might be because of fatherlessness and other situations, but for Jews, a lot of power has been held in the female aspect. You read the Old Testament, read some of their own literature. You look at Judges and Amos and things of that nature, and what you find is a kind of collectivist culture that's very common amongst Jews. An egalitarian, an equity kind of bent to their culture, right? They're not very individualistic. Christians are more individualist, right? There's more of a focus on the truth, right? Whereas with Judaism, there's more of a focus on order and in helping your brother and helping the community. Whereas, Christianity is more of an individual journey. Judaism is more of a collective journey. And then, so you take all of that, and then you take the historical kind of aspects where Jews have been pushed out of culture because of their differentness, right? George Simmel wrote a great article. It's only like 2 pages. Everyone should read it, called The Stranger, that really shows how the Jew kind of sits in between culture. Like they're able to see the culture, they live in the culture, but they're kind of the world, but not in it. And so you take all of those things, the high IQ, the focus on educating their young men, especially in literature and mathematics and critical thinking from a very young age, their matriarchal kind of familial structure, them sitting apart, the historical push into industries that are deemed dirty like usury and lending. And you put all that together, and what you're going to find is nepotism and subcultures of Jews that are in positions of power, and all of a sudden people have found their spider, right?
Yeah.
They go, the Jew is the spider. And they don't differentiate between the venomous spider and the spider that just lays a net that catches all the mosquitoes that actually do spread disease.
Mm-hmm.
To them, they're all the spider.
Yeah, and I think Michael Malice has a good way of putting it. Like, these people already have the answer before the question is asked. Right?
Absolutely. It's what a meta narrative is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, why did the planes crash into the towers? The Jews, of course.
Right.
Then,
like the whole dancing Israeli thing. It's like
yeah.
I had to react to that Sam Hyde video the other day, and it was trash. Oh my God. But it was just like it reminded me of that comedy skit. Like, all we got to do now is the clues. You know what I mean? It's like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, Mossad took out the towers, and then they were like, now let's put some Mossad agents out there to watch it and dance. It's like, no, you know what I mean? Like, that's such a dumb explanation. But I mean, like, everyone has to be careful of this, right? So, I mean, for example, as a libertarian, I'm guilty of this as well. I hear about some fucked up thing and I go, how is this the government's fault? Like, that's my natural knee-jerk reaction. And 99% of the fucking time I'm right? But like, there's still one or two, like, sometimes corporations are just fraudulent, evil bastards, right? It's not necessarily the government's fault when some town gets poisoned by when their water supply becomes cancerous. It's like, yeah, did the EPA have a role in protecting them and setting up a system that isn't perfect and being able to punish these corporations when they commit fraud? Sure, right? But my knee-jerk reaction is always, the government fucked this up. Let me find out how the government fucked it up. And sometimes the answer isn't necessarily that the government fucked it up, right? There's some other factor that is at play, right? So I mean, we all have ideologies that has the answer before the question is even asked, right? The difference is, do you have the willpower to recognize that a generalization isn't actually an answer? It's just your starting point.
Yeah. And then I think, right, where this can kind of move into is like class analysis, right? Like, going back to Hopper, he made the Austrian class analysis. Very good paper. I recommend people to read it.
Very good paper. Right? Absolutely. It's hold on, that's not the actual title. It's Austrian and Marxian class analysis or something like that.
So yeah, and it kind of like, it was interesting, right? Because I was kind of like the Jordan Peterson, James Lindsay view that like all class analysis is bad, right? And it's just like, and it can only lead to bad conclusions, right? And then I'm just reading this and it's like, maybe Marx wasn't completely wrong in some senses, because like looking at history, there has obviously been an oppressor class, right? I think that is an obvious, right? And and for Marx to point out, especially when he goes back through like his like the cycles, right? You got slavery, then feudalism, right? These are obvious oppressing classes, right? But he just makes the mistake, right, of when talking about capitalism, the oppressing class is the bourgeoisie.
I would suggest everyone that is trying to understand Marxian class analysis, or I would say not necessarily class analysis, trying to understand historical materialism, right? Which is really like that historical analysis from a Marxist perspective of the contradictions inherent to class warfare or whatever, right? And the resolutions and the synthesis, that leads to those revolutions. To read Engels' Socialism, Scientific and Utopic, Part 1, right? Like Engels is a much more intelligible writer of Marxism than Marx is. Like Marx is just like high on opium somewhere, being like the fucking Jews, you know what I mean? Right. And then like Engels is like, it's just a much cleaner read. But yeah, no, I think the thing is that the problem with Marxism is kind of like how you said with that Michael Malice quote, right? Is that they have the answer before the question is asked, right? So they already have many false axioms, and then they look for historical analysis. They do some form of like historical analysis, and then kind of like play it through that lens, of their worldview. But it's like that doesn't mean that the historical facts are wrong, and that doesn't mean that like the history of some level of oppressed group of people didn't exist, right? It's like, but as we said, as I said when we were talking about the Israel-Palestine thing, it's sometimes what you don't say is just as important as what you do say. And so when you have a belief and then you only pick out the historical things, so there are lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. And one of the games I like to play, right, is let's talk about black crime. Right? So I'm just going to spit off some things, right? Black people make up 27% of police fatalities. Black people make up 28% of police interactions. Black people are 13% of the population, not even, like about 12.6. They make up over 50% of the violent crime. But they make up about 26% of crime in general. Black people make up 60% of the incarceration rate. Every one of those statistics tells a story. And if I were to omit some of those statistics in favor of others, and I was just to say, black people make up this percentage, 28% of police interactions, 13% of the population, over 50% of the violent crime, that tells a story without me saying anything other than the facts. And if I were to say only black people make up 13% of the population, 27% of police fatalities, and 60% of the incarceration rate, that tells a story. So that's kind of the problem with any kind of class analysis, is that the data that you use to inform your perspective tells a story. And so when you come into it with certain axioms, and then you find the supporting evidence to support the story that you have, all of a sudden you have a really compelling story that's bullshit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. And it's full of all kinds of truths, but it's missing a bunch of other truths. Right. And we see this so much with like the trust the science kind of things. I can't tell you how many times somebody like shows me some study that proves that I'm wrong. And then just like a very quick analysis at the methodology, or just a thought about like, what did they not test, immediately makes the study crumble or it's useless. And so that's kind of the key thing with like class analysis in general, is that I think Austrian class analysis is more accurate, right? Mm-hmm. But even Austrian class analysis fails to tell a complete narrative, a complete story, right? Yeah. Because it doesn't really go into, like, we're not really going into culture. We're not really going into, people's material conditions, right? Which is something the Marxists love to use as evidence. And it's something Austrians don't really use. But it's like, I don't know, maybe looking at material conditions is important to understanding the dynamic shifts in power in a culture, right? Like, for example, I think much of the reason we haven't revolted in the West against ever increasing authoritarian regimes and governments is because we have DoorDash and we have cheap TVs. You know what I mean? Like I do think we're placated by an increase in our material conditions. And the Marxists would look at material conditions completely opposite, right? They would use the same data that I say that showcases pacification of that, and they would say, well, look at the Gini coefficient. Look at how, income inequality has skyrocketed, right? Look at how, people at the bottom, their lives have only gotten marginally better, but they don't have healthcare and they don't have this, and they don't have that. You know what I mean? So I like Austrian class analysis. I think it's closer, but I think ultimately many of these kind of like, there is a paper by C. Wright Mills, who is a critical theorist, kind of Marxist sociologist in the 60s and 50s. And he talks about this concept called the sociological imagination. And basically what he says is you're a bad critical theorist when you only view the world from critical theory perspective. You've got to look at it from a structural, functionalist perspective,
Mm-hmm.
a symbolic interactionalist perspective, a dramaturgy, like these different schools of thought that capture information that like sometimes you miss. And so, yeah, I mean, personally, I've been developing for years my own sociological lens that I hope to put out one day, but that will probably be the most important thing I do, which means much like George R. Martin, I might not ever finish it. You know what I mean? Because it's my baby, but, I've developed a system that I tend to use in my personal analysis of social systems and class and things like that, which is I call it oh my God, my brain is farting and I can't think of the word that I named my own theory. We'll skip it because I don't want to get too into the weeds, trying to explain it. Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Cultural cost theory.
Okay.
I take an economic perspective, an Austrian economic perspective to all social interactions and institutions is the short way of putting it.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, we're an hour and 12 minutes in. I think that makes for a pretty good podcast, don't you think?
I mean, it all depends. I'm a streamer, so it's like I'll talk to a lot of podcasters, and they'll be like, "We've been going for like an hour and a half," and I'm like, "Yeah, I can go for 4 more." And they're like, "Jesus Christ, what?" And I'm like, "This is what I do. Like, I need an editor because I don't have time or the desire to like put out videos. I need someone to go through all my shit." But yeah, man, I wish you well. Like I said in the beginning, just because I do think we need to gatekeep the philosophy doesn't mean that we need to gatekeep the different ways that people communicate and the different audiences that they speak to. And so I'm always excited to see, Gen Z start to pop in, and like hopefully kind of like mentor them in the philosophy to some degree, but at the same time, let you guys speak a language that I don't speak. Because Skibbity, oh my fuck. I literally called my sister and was like, what the fuck is Skibbity? Like, what is Skibbity and what is Skibbity toilet? And like, she sent me the videos and I was like, I have lived to see man-made creations that are just horrors. Like my millennial brain broke. And I was like, what the fuck is this talking head in a toilet singing and screaming? It gave me an existential crisis. Like as a millennial, I had to run to the refrigerator and grab an avocado and chop it up and put it on toast to like be back in my safe space. Like, it was like, I was like, this is horrible. And then she was like, no, you don't understand. It's Gen Z making fun of Gen Alpha and co-opting Gen Alpha's memes and then making them our own. And I'm like, oh, and then like I kind of got it. You know what I mean? It's like I was like, oh, so it's like petty and an insult while at the same time just being a like you wouldn't understand meme because it's literally just a like we're our own thing, you wouldn't get it, all wrapped into one thing. And I was like, I get it now. And she's like, you don't get it, you wouldn't understand. I'm like, fuck you, I got it. And she's like, no, you don't. And I'm like, all right, I get it enough to get it.
Yeah, but Gen Z humor has so many levels of irony. It's just you need to be, like born in it to understand it, to get all of like the layers that are there,
No, it's
and
not.
oh,
That's
oh,
half true.
oh,
No, no.
oh,
Hold on. We're not
okay,
finishing the podcast right now. We're arguing
okay,
about this for a second. Listen to me.
yeah, yeah,
Listen.
yeah,
I agree that there is a surrealist element, right? Of like layers of irony in a lot of Gen Z humor, right? Like you can see it's almost like a Salvador Dali movie in
mm,
some of it. And then there is a lot of it that is humorous just because it's chaotic, just because it's like there are a few great artists of Gen Z comedy that are making like layers of irony and like kind of like a post existentialist nihilist kind of thing. Like the millennials had an existential crisis because we're never going to buy a home. And like Gen Z were like, yeah, that's been true since the day I was born. Like what, like
mhm.
just hop on the ride and let's do hood rat shit with our hood rat friends. And I'm like, but I'm never going to own a home. And they're like, yeah, duh. And you know what I mean? Like, so like, I agree that there is that, but then there is like this massive amount of shit that you guys find funny that is just like I took a video and then I got a dog to scream and then I did an explosion. Isn't that funny? And it's like, no, that's not layers of irony. That's just mashed together bullshit. And the fact that you guys find it funny is very concerning. Right? Like it's like you guys have
Concerning.
given up on everything. And so just random noise becomes funny to you guys. You're
It's
laughing at just imagining me showing a random video with a dog whelping and then an explosion. Like you're losing it right now, and that's a problem. Okay?
see, us Gen Z, we're of the Camus school. All right, we just like to dance along for the ride and just accept the world for its absurdity. All right, you know, it's a pure joy that we experience. We enjoy things for the sake of it. You know.
Yeah, no. Like Gen X humor is the worst humor. Can we agree on that at
Uh,
least? Because millennial humor is
what
subversion.
is that human? Like what is Gen X humor?
Gen X humor is like ego based for as much as I can tell. Like
Okay.
the back in my day we used to drink out of the water hose and like
Ah,
we're
yeah,
bad at like we're the rebels.
yeah, no, I
We're
got
you
it.
know what I mean? Like we get it. You're just the dumb kids, right? Like
Mm,
at least millennial humor is like subversion of expectation. That's what it
mm,
is, right? Like it's very similar to stand up comedy is like our version of humor. It's like
mm.
premise, then subvert the premise in a way that you didn't expect, and the shock of it going to a place that you didn't expect is what we find funny,
Yeah.
right? Or like
Okay.
so like I like what is it? I was like, I wrote down a joke just because I was, sometimes I'm ADHD, I get bored. I'm like, oh, I'll write down a joke, right? And so, like, one joke that I wrote down that I think is like a good example of like kind of how our generation views comedy is like, I view bumper stickers and car vandalism kind of the same way I do rape. Like, you tell me your car's vandalized, but I want to know what was your car wearing? Right, like that's a millennial joke, right? It's edgy, and then like there's a premise, right? And the idea being you if you park in a fucking, in the middle of Atlanta and you have a MAGA sticker on your car, well, you're kind of asking for it. And I'm hinting without saying that women that dress like sluts are asking to get raped, but I'm not really saying that because that would be monstrous. It's a joke.
Mm. Yeah,
That's kind of an example of millennial humor, right? Is like taking a concept and then kind of getting to the edge of it without really saying it, and then at the same time setting something up and then being like, what? And then connecting those two things or subverting the thing.
yeah,
Gen Z
yeah.
is just like fucking like, I was in a closet and then a dog barked and then I fucking floated out of the closet. And isn't that how ghosts are? Arf, arf. And you're like, what the fuck is happening? And you're like, you know what I mean? Like Gen Z humor is like fucking like you start watching some television show and then a guy goes and they deserved it. And then it's like and then it's immediately like some fucking like genocide footage with dance music playing and like it's vibe based and it's like funny because he said that they deserved it and then now with the new cut away at a new thing we're implying that like the Jews deserve to be holocausted or some shit and then it's just like with fucking video zooming in and out like that and I'm like what is happening, like why is this funny?
It's look, as I said, you needed to be, you've merely, we were born in the dark.
I've merely
You
adopted
merely
it.
adopted it. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on Gen Z humor for a millennial, but also what the fuck, I'm concerned. That's all I'm saying.
Uh,
The kids are not
well,
all right, is what I'm trying to say.
I think the kids are all right. I think they're like, a lot of them are just commies, but other than that, they're all right. Um,
At least you guys stopped listening to suicide music. All right. So you're doing better than you guys were 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago, all of your music was like, oh, my parents beat me. Oh, so I do lots of drugs and all I think about is the darkness and we're on Tinder and Tinder is just a slot machine game towards my eventual death. And you're like, Jesus Christ, when did the Cure come back? Like,
it was
fuck, dude.
puberty.
You guys were
That's
all
what
you guys were
puberty.
all gothic while dressing like preps. It was very confusing to the millennials.
Uh, we- Man, that's. I'm having so many realizations right now. It's it's like I remember when I was in like middle school, and it's just like
I'm just saying, all I'm saying
it's
is
just
thank God XXX Tenacion is dead. That's because like he needed to go away for you guys to heal.
yeah, literally. I remember, but then when he died, man, he that was like the only thing I like I don't really listen to that music, but whenever I was at school, right, it's just like it was just blasting everywhere.
Yeah,
Like
I'm just saying, you
it was.
guys needed to break up with him, and the only way that was going to happen is if he died.
Yes, he was our Tupac.
Oh God! Oh, I hate you so much. I hate Gen Z. I hate you guys. All
Um,
right, man. It's been a
all
wonderful
right, yeah.
conversation. Did you have anything final for me, or?
Um, no, I think we can cue the outro now. This is Scott from Fabian Liberty. I'll have his stuff in the description. He's you're mainly active on YouTube and Twitter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, go find him there. And yes, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
All right.
Peace.
Peace.